everyone, welcome to today's lecture. Today we are going to discuss about news gathering and reporting types and techniques. As you all must be aware of the fact that basically news is something which is kind of difficult to define. There are many attributes which are associated with news, but one thing that we all know is that news or information, basically news carries information about the daily life or any particular event that has happened recently. Now, which event will be reported is something which is based on the understanding of the reporters or the journalists who are working in different newspaper houses or electronic media agencies and houses. Basically, the relevance of the story plays a very important part in the reporting of the news. So, relevance and usefulness are the important factors which are taken into consideration when somebody tries to go ahead and report a news. So, this particular factor of relevance and usefulness is dependent on how the news is considered to be for the reporters or the media organizations. So, what happens is whether the news is worthy or not, it kind of depends on a range of factors. So, which factors will be taken into consideration, that also kind of varies according to the organizational policies and organizational types or the different media types that are into the business of presenting or bringing out news. There are certain news values which are of utmost importance when somebody is considering a news item to be worthy or not. Now, the news values are also a lot of news values are taken into consideration when a story has come to a media house. So, the first news value is that of timeliness. So, if a story is timely or if some event is happening at this particular moment itself, then that particular event is likely to be covered by the news organization. So, if there is going to be some election which will happen maybe in a month or so, then definitely the news organization will cover that particular story. The second important factor which plays a very important part in the consideration of a particular news is that of impact. So, different news can have different kinds of impact. So, basically if it is a story about a war that is going to happen, or maybe some country has got into some kind of a political turmoil, then that particular news story has a huge impact all over the world, and it is likely to be considered to be reported by the news organization. The third important value is that of that of prominence. Now, prominence of a story is kind of dependent on a range of issues. So, whether a news story is prominent or not, or whether the news story is considered to be important or not, it kind of depends on the news organization, as I have already mentioned. So, a particular story may be considered to be important if it has value for the people, like some celebrity is getting married. So, this is a soft news story, but this story is important because people want to know more about a celebrity who is going to get married. So, they want to see this particular news. So, this news will be taken into consideration by the news organization. Again, if it is a story about some kind of a fight that has happened, in that case also this story is likely to be covered by the news organization, because this story is also considered to be important story by the news organization, and the people also will want to know more about a fight which has happened between maybe some political party. Okay. Then the next important factor is that of proximity. So, if an accident has happened in Kolkata itself, because we all stay in Kolkata or we are living in West Bengal. So, if there is an accident which has taken place in Kolkata, then that particular story will gain more coverage in the local news channels or the regional news channels, because this particular story is of utmost importance for the people residing in this particular place. So, proximity that way plays an important part. Apart from that is that of conflict. Now, conflict is something which is always considered to be important. So, if there is some kind of a fight, as I already kind of mentioned, or if there is some kind of maybe some kind of sanctions which has been brought out by a particular country against another country, then that particular story will also be reported by the news organization. Another important factor is that a story, any particular story or any particular incident which is unexpected. So, if there has been some death of a celebrity or of a politician, or if there has been some changeover in government, like the thing that happened in Afghanistan a few months back. So, this changeover is also considered to be an important news story, because that changeover has been kind of sudden. So, this story is also considered to be a story which has a very important significance for the people, and it is likely to be reported. Another factor is that of necessity. Now, necessity also is something which is dependent on a range of issues. So, the factors or the values which news values which I have already mentioned, those values can be taken into consideration when somebody is thinking whether this particular story needs to be reported or not. So, in case of news story, there are a range of components that we have to take into consideration. The first and foremost thing which I think everybody knows about is that a story has to be reported accurately. That means that there has to be some kind of a truthfulness in the story, meaning that an incident which you are going to report, you have to be aware of the fact that that particular incident has happened, way in which that incident might have affected people. So, all the facts have to be verified and checked before it goes into the television channel or before it goes into the edit table. So, that has to be taken into consideration. The second important component of a news story is attribution. That is, when we are writing a story, we are getting it from a range of sources, or sometimes we take stories from the news agencies also. So, when we are reporting a particular story, if we have got the story from a range of different sources, then the valid source, or the valid source in the sense like the source which needs its name to be reported, or the source which wants its name to be there in the main story, we have to give the attribution to that particular source. As you all must know, and we will also discuss, that some sources should not be revealed when we are covering a news story, but there are some sources like news agencies or bureau reports. Those sources need to be mentioned when we are writing a news story, so that we can bring it to the forefront that this story, the main crux or the main news item that we are reporting is based on the story which has been supplied by the reports or supplied by the governmental organization. So, that has to be done. Also, after that, it is very important that whatever story we report, it has to be verified. And in this age of online media and digital age specifically, there is a rise in fake news, and because there has been a rise in fake news, it has become very difficult for the people to understand which particular news is correct, which particular news is fake. So, the reporters also have a responsibility to verify the sources. So, they might have got a lot of news item, or they might have got a lot of information from different sources, but it is upon the reporters to try and get more information or do their own research in relation to the news stories or in relation to the information that they have received, so that they don't broadcast or they don't write a particular news story based on any kind of false information. That is very important in case of journalism, and that has to be kept into consideration when we are writing a story. The next important thing is that of fairness. So, any particular story should be fair in a sense it has to be neutral. I think you all must be aware of that. It is one of the most important ethical values of journalism, that whenever a news story is being reported, it has to be neutral and fair, not biased. And also there has to be a proper balance. So even if there is a subjective interpretation of the story, there has to be a balance between, what could happen and what has happened. Okay, so it has to be properly mentioned in the story, so that the people who are watching that story, they don't get confused. Also, the story has to be clarity. It has to be written in a language which is understandable for the people. So it has to have that kind of a brevity associated with itself. And we should also kind of try to cover a human interest angle which can be added to the story, so that the story can find more acceptance among the people. So that has to be also there, and it is basically the responsibility of the news organization as well as the journalists and reporters to make it a point that all these components are being taken care of and the story is being presented to the people in an accurate and true form. A news story is something which is constructed by the journalist or reporter, and in order to bring the news story in front of the people, they rely on a range of sources. This particular range of sources and the information these sources bring to the news story, that forms the building block of a news story. Here we have to also remember one important thing, that the journalist's understanding of the story and the subsequent coverage kind of depends on his or her own understanding of the event. So whenever we say that though journalism is considered to be objective, but definitely when the story is being written or covered, there are a range of factors which play an important part, including the way in which the journalist considers the story to be important, or the way in which the journalist interprets the story will be presented in that particular way. So some amount of subjectivity is there in the story itself, and something which was already mentioned by Stuart Hall himself, that the production of news kind of depends on the bureaucratic organization of media and the organization of news stories based on the news values which I mentioned, and thirdly also on contextualizing an event in order to construct the news story. So contextualizing an event is very important when the reporter is trying to present the story to the people, and the contextualization is done on the basis of the existing principles in the society. News sources can be divided or understood on the basis of a range of factors. First is the primary source and the second one is the secondary source. So primary source, basically as the name suggests, that the research or the journalist has got the main story from maybe somebody who has been an eyewitness to the incident, or the journalist has got the story from some kind of an official report and then he has constructed the story. So somehow the journalist has got the story, maybe has got a first hand account of the story. Sometimes the journalist himself or herself can be on the field, and on the basis of that he or she can get access to that particular story, and then on the basis of that he or she can actually go ahead and find more materials related to that story. Now when I talk about materials, basically sometimes getting a hunch or getting some kind of a tip regarding a story is not enough. So once you get a tip regarding something that has happened in some locality from maybe your source, who is a primary source, you need to find more about it. So you can go to the different locations and find more about it, that you can do, or else what you need to do is you need to refer to the secondary sources. So secondary sources basically are the websites or the books written on that particular aspect or on that particular location. So when you refer to that particular those books or those websites, you get a lot of details about that particular locality and why that locality has been undergoing different kinds of crimes, or why crimes are happening in that particular locality per se, what is the history behind it. So when you do so, you get a lot of information on which you can rely on, and then you can go ahead and ask questions to the people residing in that particular locality. Now, coming to the news sources, it can also be kind of divided into three other types based on the people who are associated with it. So, a journalist can actually get news or information from the human sources, that is, as I mentioned, eyewitness or participants or some kind of an expert who knows about that particular issue that is being covered. Then there are physical sources, basically where the records or the documents or the governmental records are taken into consideration, and it is being read by the journalist and reporter, and on the basis of that the story is done. And the third important source is the online source. We all know that in this digital age, basically most of the information is available online. So the different websites, even the social media sites, they provide a lot of information, and after getting the information, the journalist or the reporter can go ahead and talk to the people who have posted a particular thing on their social media website, and on the basis of that more information can be gathered, and then the reporting can be done. So that is also done, and there are different ways of doing that. Now, when we talk about news sources, we have to also remember that the news sources which are kind of traditional news sources and which has existed for a long period of time basically are the news agencies. So news agencies, as I already mentioned in this lecture, are something that actually provides you the raw news item. So we have news agencies like Reuters, Associated Press, and in India basically we have Press Trust of India, UNI. These news agencies provide the raw material for a particular story, and many news channels and newspapers subscribe to these news agencies because subscribing to them actually helps the news agencies to get the story first hand. Sometimes basically it is not possible for the news organizations or media houses to send reporters each and everywhere in the country or around the world. So subscribing to these news agencies actually helps them to report stories from different locations around the world, also around the country. And news agencies provide raw data, and the data is then worked on, and the copies are written by the reporters so that it becomes understandable for the public. Now we come to the reporters and correspondents who collect the story from the field. So many a times, a network has to be built in order to get access to a range of stories. So what happens is the reporters and correspondents, they basically try to talk to a range of people belonging to different offices or who are working in the government offices, and they try to build networks to collect the story. Even they have to maintain good relationship with other news organization, so that a particular news can be broken into, or a particular news can be taken into consideration and reported for his or her own channel. There are individual sources. In case of individual sources, what happens is, we see that these sources basically provide information on the basis of some amount of money. So the reporters need to cultivate the individual sources so that they can give them timely information. So that also is being done by the different reporters working in different media organizations. The bureau reports basically are those reports which are brought out by the different subsidiaries of the government. So there are different local offices which are there all over the country, and these local offices give a range of information to the journalists. Now we come to reporting, and reporting, as we know, is a process of gathering and presenting the matters in public interest. And here also, as with journalism, basically reporting requires a lot of research, and if we are not well versed with research, or if a journalist is not well versed with research, then he or she will not be able to properly report the story. So in order to report a story properly, what is needed is verification of the material and proper analysis of the material. So, a kind of critical and analytical skill is something which is required by the journalist, and it has to be cultivated, and also the target audience needs to be identified. Target audience meaning the people for whom the story is being made, because the story has to be sequenced in a manner so that it becomes understandable as well as important for the audience to whom we are catering for in this particular story. So, in case of news reporting, there are several factors that are required to be maintained by the reporter. So, of course, the personality of the reporter, a good news sense. Also, the reporter has to have an analytical ability and clarity over the language. So, whatever language you are reporting in, you have to know about that language. You need to be well conversant in that particular language. Now, basically the different types of reporting, if we consider, we have to understand that in these different types of reporting, first and foremost thing is we can divide the types of reporting based on three different or three broad categories. First is on the basis of the sources of its origin. Second is on the basis of the subjects of its manifestation, and third is based on the nature of its content and presentation. So, the first thing that we need to understand is basically there has been a kind of reporting where the reporter reports from the government establishments. So, government establishments basically provide the reporters with a range of information, and it can be in relation to parliamentary reporting, it can be reporting from conflict zones, so that reporting can also be done. It can be some kind of a judicial reporting. In case of non-governmental organizations, basically what we see is it can be issues related to development, it can be issues related to the events which are happening in and around the country or worldwide. Then there is a beat on arts, fashion and glamour that can be covered. Then there are different reporters who cover the beat of politics. So, political reporting is another very important beat which is covered by the journalists. It can be international affairs can also be covered by the journalists. Again, any kind of crime based reporting or any kind of accident. So, there are different journalists who are trained for reporting that kind of a story. And another very important type of reporting is that of investigative reporting. And as you all must know, investigative reporting is a kind of reporting which requires a lot of hard work and lot of time. So, in this case you need to have a source who will supply you with the information, and the journalist is disguised as somebody else, and he or she goes with a hidden camera or he or she goes with a hidden microphone and records the stuff that is happening in a particular place and in a particular with a particular individual, and then after a period of 3 to 4 months the story comes out. So, in India basically Cobra Post is a website which basically is into a lot of investigative reporting and journalism. And then we come to reporting from conflict zone. So, reporting from conflict zone is something which is kind of a very difficult kind of reporting to consider. So, the journalists actually are sent to those places where there is a war going on, or where there is some kind of a political turmoil, and they have to cover it from those particular areas, and it is a very difficult job also for the journalists to do that. And another important thing that we have to understand, that in case of conflict zone also the reporting has to be objective, and there has to be some kind of an interpretative and analytical capability of the journalist. Then comes commentary reporting. So, commentary reporting, as the name suggests, is basically the journalist or the reporter is just giving a commentary on that particular issue that has happened. So, it might be a political event that is happening. So, the journalist is reporting about that event as the way it is happening or taking place live on the field. So, that is an example of commentary reporting. So, there are different tools and techniques of doing the reporting. So, the first and important one is to identify the subject. So, the subject of interest has to be identified. On the basis of that, the contacts have to be built on. So, managing contacts is another very important thing which is linked to reporting, and verifying the information, very very important, because if the journalist does not verify the information that he or she has received, then the reporting is going to be failed, or it can result in fake news. Then the interviews have to be conducted. So, preliminary interviews can be conducted by the journalist after getting the information, and then the journalist can go ahead and find out the secondary or additional information. So, in this case also the journalist has to keep in mind that there are different laws catering to the country in which the reporting is happening. So, if the reporting is happening in India, then the journalist in order to know more about the information which he or she has received can actually go ahead and use the Right to Information Act in order to get additional information regarding a particular material. Apart from that, it is very important for the journalist that after he or she has written the story, he or she also needs to follow up on the material that he or she has already published, because people are also interested to know more about the follow up stories. Okay? So, that also has to be taken into consideration. And last and not the least, that is whenever any particular news story is being covered, the foremost thing that has to be remembered or kept in mind is that journalism is a noble profession. So, whatever reports have been brought in front of the audience, those reports needs to be accurate. Nobody should be misquoted, or any particular statement should not be distorted, and the privacy of the source has to be protected. So, if the sources are individual sources, if they are not news agencies, then it is the duty of the journalist to protect the privacy of the source. So, these ethical principles needs to be followed whenever a reporting job is to be done, and that is the way in which news is cultivated and created all around the world. Thank you.